Welcome, I am JT the Storyteller. I will guide you to sleep with relaxing yet intriguing stories that will affect your dreams. If you watch this video to fall asleep, please subscribe and like the video. Also comment where you are from and what time it is. The first time I brewed it, I measured everything too carefully. 2 dried datura flowers, steeped in water just below boiling. No sweetener. I watched the petals unfurl like sleeping things waking in pain. Colin had warned me, don't take it alone. And not more than once. But I was already alone. And once never really means once when you need it to. The tea smelled like dust and decay, like something stolen from the mouth of the earth. I sipped. Bitter. Chalky. My stomach tightened immediately, but I forced it down. 1 swallow. 2. 3. Then I waited. 15 minutes. Nothing. I remember standing by the sink, disappointed. I turned to wash the cup, and the kitchen was gone. Just like that. Gone. It had melted into a hallway I didn't recognize, narrow and twisting, lined with doors I'd never seen before. The wallpaper pulsed as if breathing. A low hum pressed against my skull. I blinked hard, gripped the counter, still there, and told myself, it's just the tea. Just the tea. But then something moved at the end of the hall. A shape. A man, maybe, wearing a wide hat. He didn't walk. He glided. His feet never touched the ground. I turned away. My breathing grew shallow. I closed my eyes and counted backward from 10, something Colin taught me. When I opened them again, I was back in my kitchen. Safe. Sober. Sweating. The mug was shattered on the floor. I told myself I imagined it. Hallucination, sure. That's what I wanted. That was the point. I'd been chasing something for weeks, some proof that the mind could be peeled open like fruit, that truth could rot beneath the rind of reality. But that hallway, that man, felt like more than just brain static. Colin came over the next night. He saw the mess, the shards of the mug in the trash, the unopened windows. You took it, didn't you? I didn't answer. He sighed. Eli, you weren't ready. No one's ever ready. He didn't laugh. He sat on the edge of the couch and put his hand on my shoulder. You need to tell me exactly what you saw. I told him about the hallway. The doors. The breathing wallpaper. The shape. I didn't mention the smell. The rot-sweet perfume that had clung to my skin even after I'd showered 3 times. The man in the hat, he asked. My stomach sank. You know him? Colin nodded slowly. He shows up when you're close to the root. The root of what? He looked at me like I should already know. The real world. That night, I dreamed of doors. 100 of them, each painted the color of bone. Some were locked. Some opened too easily. Behind every one, I could hear whispering, not in words, but in hunger. I woke up to find one of the doors from my dream in my hallway. A real door. Where my coat closet used to be. I touched the knob. It was warm. Wet. I didn't open the door. Not right away. I stood there for hours, frozen, the world around me quieter than I'd ever heard it. Even the hum of the refrigerator was gone. No wind outside. No cars. Just silence, and the sound of my heart pounding. I called Colin. Straight to voicemail. I wanted to believe it was still a hallucination, some post-trip echo, but the door cast a shadow. It breathed. I placed my hand on it and whispered, I didn't mean to come here. The door pulsed, once, like a living thing. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Just the closet again. My coats, my boots, dust. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. When I looked up, the mirror didn't reflect me. It reflected that hallway. The one from before. And standing in it, clearer now, was the man in the hat. He raised one hand and pointed at me. Not at the mirror. At me. My knees gave out. I hit the tile hard. When I looked again, the mirror showed only me, shaking, alone. The next morning, I found a flower on my pillow. A datura bloom. Still fresh. Still warm. Darkness isn't quiet. It breathes. It pulses. In that absolute black, I heard everything, the grinding of teeth I didn't have, the sloshing of blood too fast for my heart, the creak of bones inside walls that shouldn't exist. The void groaned like it was thinking. Then I heard footsteps. I blinked. The darkness lifted, not like light had returned, but like the blackness itself peeled away. I was lying in the hallway again, though the house had become even more distorted. The floorboards breathed. The wallpaper whispered. Paintings twisted in their frames to look at me. I crawled to my feet, dizzy, every part of me tingling with numb heat. A mirror stood where the kitchen door used to be. Not hung. Standing. Like a person. And this time, I did see myself. But not as I am. The reflection was thin, skeletal, my skin wrapped too tightly over my face. My eyes were black pits. Flowers grew from my mouth, thick, white datura blooms that pulsed with breath. Something moved behind me in the reflection. A shape. I spun around. No one. I turned back. The reflection grinned. And then it moved on its own, raised its hand, extended a finger, and pressed it to the glass from the other side. The mirror cracked. I ran again. Through the melting hallway, past doors that sang and windows that wept. I couldn't tell if I was still inside the house or somewhere else entirely. The walls stretched too far. Angles bent wrong. Some rooms opened into starless skies. One doorway showed my old childhood bathroom, and my mother was brushing her teeth, humming a lullaby I hadn't heard in 20 years. She didn't see me. I whispered, "Mom." She froze. The lights flickered. She turned, slowly, and her face was gone. Smooth. Flowering. A datura bulb split down the middle, and from inside came the voice of the man in the hat, deep and hollow, "You planted this." I slammed the door shut and backed away, trembling. There was no air. My throat burned. I collapsed near the staircase, curled into a ball, wishing it would end. Then I heard the soft voice. "Eli." I looked up. It was Colin. He stood at the top of the stairs, holding something in his hands. A bouquet of datura flowers, their stalks dripping with black fluid. "You're almost there," he said. "Don't stop now." "I want out," I choked. "I want it to stop." "You wanted the veil lifted. This is what's behind it." He descended the steps, slowly. Each footstep bloomed mushrooms in the wood. His eyes glowed faintly like moons drowned underwater. "I didn't mean this," I said. "There's no half measure," he whispered, kneeling beside me. "No safe corner of the mind. You wanted truth. You're living it." I looked down. And saw that my fingers had become roots, burrowing into the floorboards. Veins split open, growing leaves. My skin cracked with bark. Colin reached out and touched my chest. Something opened there. Not a wound. A garden. I screamed. Not from pain, from recognition. The same way you might scream if you opened your mouth and another voice came out. One that had always been hiding behind your thoughts. The house trembled. The walls burst into white bloom. The floor split open beneath me, and I fell, not downward, but inward. I didn't land. I simply was somewhere new. A forest, but not like any forest I'd ever seen. The trees pulsed, their bark damp and fleshy. Leaves unfolded and folded again in strange sequences, like lungs trying to remember how to breathe. The air was heavy with perfume. Sweet, cloying. Datura. Always datura. I walked, though my legs didn't feel real. More like memories of legs. Shapes moved in the underbrush. Not animals, shadows. Tall, lean, flickering things with too many limbs. They hissed in languages I almost understood. Words that tickled the base of my skull. I came to a clearing. In its center stood a house, my house, but twisted, grown like a tumor from the earth, covered in vines and white blossoms. The windows were eyes. The chimney exhaled fog. A figure stood in the doorway. Him. The man in the hat. Closer than ever. His shape was solid now, though his face was still lost beneath the brim. "You followed the route," he said. His voice was not a voice, it was wind through bone, leaves scraping glass. "What are you?" I asked. My voice barely rose above a breath. He turned his head slowly toward me. "I am the gardener of what grows in silence. The one who tends the thoughts you buried." I took a step back. But my feet sank into the soil, and it gripped me like a mouth. From below, something warm curled around my ankles, roots, vines, tendrils. My skin began to itch. Then burn. I looked down. My veins had turned green. Leaves sprouted from the cracks in my arms. "Please," I gasped. "Make it stop. I don't want this anymore." "But you do," the man said. "You reached into the dark. You brewed the tea. You drank the god hiding in the petals. I didn't know, no one ever does." He raised one arm, and the house behind him groaned. A door opened, not the front door. A hidden one, just beneath the soil. From it came the sound of my voice, crying out. Begging. I saw flashes, me as a boy, staring at the basement door, afraid to open it. Me at 20, locking myself in a bathroom during a panic attack, whispering names I didn't remember. Me just yesterday, holding the mug, hands shaking, whispering, "Just a glimpse. You have to go through it," the man said. "Or remain in bloom forever." He stepped aside. The vines released me. The earth let go. I walked to the threshold, heart hammering, skin cracking like old bark. And I descended. One step. Another. The stairs were soft beneath my feet, like meat. The air was thick. At the bottom, a room. Plain. Unlit. And in the center, me. Sitting in a chair. Eyes closed. Wires attached to my temples. A steady beeping. Hospitals. Machines. A voice behind me whispered, "He's not responding." Another, "No change." Still unresponsive. I turned. Behind the mirror glass wall, I saw doctors. A nurse. Colin. They were watching me. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Am I asleep?" The man in the hat stood beside me. "No, he said gently. You never woke up. The black phone sat on a pedestal in the middle of the field. Old-fashioned, rotary dial, long coiled cord. It rang steadily, like a heartbeat. I approached, each footstep echoing unnaturally loud in the nothingness. The ground was white, soft, like ash that hadn't settled. The sky above was void. Not black. Just empty. The phone rang. I didn't want to answer it. But I had to. I lifted the receiver. There was no voice. Just a sound. Wet, floral, like petals blooming in fast forward. Then, my own voice. Soft. Broken. Don't wake up. I froze. There's nothing up there for us anymore. Just bills and cold showers. Dead ends. Colin's gone. He left. You remember that, don't you? My breath caught. But down here, the voice whispered, we can grow forever. I looked around. The field began to change. Datura flowers rose from the ground, hundreds, then thousands, unfurling like mouths. The air grew thick with their perfume. My skin shimmered, flaked. Bark cracked along my arms. Leaves bloomed from my chest. I fell to my knees, still holding the phone. I don't know what's real anymore, I whispered. You never did. Then, silence. The line went dead. The phone melted in my hand. I looked down and saw my reflection in the ash beneath me. My face, my body, but completely overtaken by growth, white blossoms for eyes, vines for veins. And yet, the expression was peaceful. Peaceful, and hollow. Something stepped behind me. I didn't turn. The man in the hat sat beside me in the field. No menace now. Just stillness. You made your choice, he said softly. I wanted to cry. Or scream. But I had no tears. No voice left. Just bloom. You'll stay with me? I asked. He nodded once. As long as you grow. The field dimmed. The flowers swayed gently. The sky above remained empty. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not really. Somewhere far above, or far away, a machine continued to beep. And somewhere in a hospital room, my body sat still, unmoving. Waiting. But I was blooming. The house with no corners. There was no address, no mailbox, no pin on any map. The beginning was sound, a low, almost inaudible hum that seemed to live just beneath the buzz of the city. It wasn't a melody or a machine, but something more organic, more sorrowful. It reminded me of the sound my mother made when she thought no one was listening, soft, broken, held just behind her teeth like she was afraid it would shatter everything if released. The hum came mostly at night. I'd lie in bed, 17 and barely hanging on, and it would rise through the floorboards, through the mattress, through the bones in my spine. Not loud, but known. A voice without words. I told myself not to follow it, but I did anyway. I wasn't quite sleepwalking. I remember how cold the pavement was beneath my bare feet, how the air hung thick and wrong, like it wasn't meant to be breathed. The streets were empty in a way that felt deliberate. No cars, no lights in the windows, not even the flicker of televisions behind curtains. It was like the world had paused to let me go. The fog started around 4th and Mercer, thick and yellowed like aged paper. Not natural. It clung low, pooling in gutters and swallowing sound. When I stepped into it, I felt something change in my chest, not pain exactly, but a kind of opening, like an old door giving way after years of silence. Then I saw it. The building rose out of the mist without warning or introduction. It looked like a hotel or a hospital or a school that had been remodeled too many times and forgotten halfway through. The architecture bent at strange angles, and the walls seemed to slouch in on themselves like they were tired of standing. It had windows, but none of them had glass. Just dark holes. The color of the exterior was indescribable, somewhere between beige and rot. I stood in front of it for a long time, long enough for the hum to change pitch. It was inside the building now. Waiting. The door opened on its own. No sound. No draft. Just slow and patient, as if the house had been expecting me for years. I stepped inside and the air shifted instantly, thick and damp, like the inside of a sealed basement after a flood. The carpet beneath my feet squished faintly with each step, and the scent of mildew, dust, and something metallic clung to the walls like a second skin. There were lights overhead, dim, yellow, flickering in rhythms that didn't follow any pattern I could recognize. The lobby, if you could call it that, was empty of furniture but full of absence. Not just the absence of people, but of purpose. The space didn't feel unused. It felt like it had forgotten why it existed. The layout made no sense. Hallways branched off at odd angles, floors sloped without reason, and corners curved instead of forming proper 90-degree turns. I realized then, as I passed from one corridor into another, that I hadn't seen a single straight edge. No corners. No sharp divides between wall and ceiling or floor. Everything bent. Everything yielded. The building felt like it had been softened deliberately, the way abuse softens memory, rounding off the edges, dulling the pain just enough to make it hard to name but impossible to forget. I passed door after door. None of them had numbers. Most had no handles, just keyholes, long, oval, and unsettling. I felt watched. Not with hostility, but with familiarity, like the house was remembering me as I walked through it. At one point, I found a section of wallpaper that had peeled away, revealing layers underneath, old floral patterns, crayon scribbles, what looked like tally marks etched into the drywall, and underneath it all, faint writing repeating over and over, "I didn't mean it, I didn't mean it, I didn't mean it." Eventually, I came to a hallway that bent in a perfect arc. At the end was a door unlike the others, painted soft pink with a small porcelain knob shaped like a rose. It felt out of place, too delicate, too sweet for the rest of the structure. I knew something waited behind it, but I touched the knob anyway and turned. The room beyond was small, and the air immediately smelled of baby powder, mildew, and the unmistakable sweetness of rot. The floor was covered in old toys, dolls missing eyes and arms, stuffed animals worn down to cloth husks, plastic figurines melted into the carpet. A rocking horse moved gently on its own in the corner, its creak soft but steady. The walls were covered in crayon drawings of houses, all the same, drawn over and over, 2 windows, 1 door, triangle roof, no people. There was a mobile above a crib spinning slowly, playing a lullaby I almost recognized. It dragged and pitched the longer I listened, turning innocent notes into something warped. The crib was empty. No. Not empty. It wasn't there. What sat inside was a darkness that had depth, a true void, the kind that pulled your gaze and made your balance tilt. I looked too long and felt myself falling. I caught the edge of the crib, heart racing. That's when I felt it, eyes on me. I turned and there he was. A man sat on the edge of a twin bed that hadn't been there a moment before. He wore a gray suit, hands folded neatly on his lap. His face was smooth. Featureless. No eyes, no mouth, just skin where expression should be. And yet, I knew him. The recognition was instant, primal, and made my stomach twist. I had never seen him before, but he was the shape behind every slammed door, the shadow cast by raised voices, the presence that lingered after cruelty. He was the embodiment of every time my mother flinched, every moment the air thickened before something awful happened. I whispered, "Dad," even though I'd never seen my father wear a suit. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just tilted his head slowly to the side, as if examining me. Then he raised his hand and pointed, calmly, not accusatory, toward the window. I turned and looked. Outside was not a yard or a street, but more building. Endless halls and rooms layered atop one another, looping back inward. The structure fed on itself, infinite and closed. There was no world outside. Only more of the same. When I turned back, the man was gone. The crib was gone. The room had changed. The drawings on the wall were no longer houses. They were eyes. Hundreds of them. Some wide with fear, some closed, some leaking red tears drawn in waxy crayon. The rocking horse was still. The mobile had stopped. Silence sat in the room like fog, thick and knowing. And then, from just behind my ear, a child's voice whispered, "Don't let him touch the door." I left the pink door behind me, though I don't remember opening it to exit. The hallway beyond was different, narrower, the ceiling lower, as if the house was beginning to crouch in on itself. The air had changed, too, warmer now, thick with something sweet and rotten, like fruit left out for too long. My footsteps were quiet against the carpet, but the silence wasn't comforting. It pressed against me, bloated and listening. I wanted to turn around, to retrace my steps, but the hallway behind me was gone. In its place was a wall, a seamless continuation of the corridor. The house had decided I was going forward. As I moved, I noticed details that hadn't been there before, a family portrait, nailed crookedly into the wall, the faces blurred by smears of water damage or time. I recognized the outlines. A tall figure with a belt at his waist. A smaller woman, her hands folded, her smile drawn on like a costume. And between them, a child that looked like a cutout. No face, no features, just the silhouette of someone who had once been there but had since been erased. I paused, staring, my chest tightening with something I couldn't name. The figures in the portrait didn't move, but they seemed to lean inward the longer I looked. I forced myself to continue. The hallway ended in a set of stairs that descended into shadow. No railing. Just steps that faded into darkness. The humming was back, but lower now, layered. Voices woven into it, muttered words I couldn't quite catch. They sounded like arguments muffled through a door. I went down slowly, counting each step to anchor myself, but the numbers fell apart in my mouth. At the bottom, I found a room that didn't want to be found. It was a kitchen, or what remained of one. The floor was linoleum, curling at the edges like burnt paper. Cabinets hung open and crooked, their contents spilled and rotting, mold-covered cereal boxes, shattered plates, a half-melted plastic kettle. The refrigerator stood ajar, its insides lined with brown stains and flies. On the table sat a single glass of milk, untouched, surrounded by crumbs and a scattering of pills. A chair had been knocked over. Another chair, larger, wooden, with a deep scratch across the backrest, stood exactly where it had always been. I didn't want to look at the scratch, but I couldn't stop myself. It was deep, jagged, familiar. I had seen it in dreams, over and over, the way you dream of teeth falling out or walking into school naked. It was the mark of anger, quick, sharp, followed by silence. This was my kitchen. Or rather, a version of it, one filtered through years of fear and blurred memory. The layout was right, but everything was wrong. Too dim. Too decayed. Time here didn't just pass, it sank and curdled. There was a sound behind me, wood creaking, slow and deliberate. I turned, and in the corner of the room, a cupboard door was swinging open on its own. Inside, instead of dishes, there were stacked cassette tapes. Dozens of them. Each one labeled with black marker, Tuesday 7 p.m., Sunday 3 a.m., Wednesday before dinner. My fingers shook as I picked one up. No names, just timestamps. I found an old cassette player on the counter and slid the tape in, pressing play. At first, only static. Then, voices, my voice, small and shaking, mixed with another voice deeper, louder, sharp like a knife dragged across glass. It wasn't just yelling, it was cutting. Questions without room for answers. The sound of something shattering. A sob. The tape clicked and stopped. I pressed eject with a numb hand. The others sat silently in the cupboard, waiting. I left them. Through a door at the far end of the kitchen, I entered another hallway, narrower still, the walls pressing in. The lights above buzzed, some flickering, some completely dead. As I walked, the wallpaper changed. It grew darker, stained with shapes that suggested damp hands, long fingernail scratches, smudged fingerprints in repeating patterns. I turned a corner, though there was no real angle, just a slow, suffocating curve, and found myself in a living room. It was fully furnished. A couch, a small TV, a coffee table with magazines from decades ago. It was too clean, too staged, like a model home built for ghosts. I sat down, more from exhaustion than curiosity. The cushion sighed beneath me. On the TV screen, static hissed before giving way to home footage. The camera shook as if held by an unsteady hand. It showed a birthday party, a child sitting at a table, cake untouched, eyes wide and uncertain. Off-screen, someone said, "Smile, baby, smile." The child tried. Then flinched. The screen went black. I turned the TV off and sat in silence. The house was not haunted in the traditional sense. There were no poltergeists, no shadows darting past in mirrors. The haunting was deeper. The house remembered. Every fear. Every raised hand. Every apology that never came. It collected them and shaped them into architecture. I wasn't walking through a building. I was walking through memory, fractured, distorted, unrelenting. A door I hadn't seen before clicked open at the far wall. I stood and walked toward it, hand trembling as I pushed it wide. Inside was a bedroom. Mine. Exactly as it had been when I was 8. The wallpaper with stars, the dresser with one drawer that always stuck, the rug I used to lie on to escape the yelling downstairs. Even the crack in the ceiling shaped like a bird. But something was different. The closet door stood open, and from the darkness within came that low hum again, louder than ever. I approached slowly. The air was thick, syrupy. The hum shifted into something like breathing. A whisper. Then words. "You never left. You just stopped looking." I took a step back, heart pounding. The door behind me slammed shut. And the light bulb flickered out. When the bulb died, it didn't just take the light with it, it took the space. I stood in perfect blackness, unable to tell where the room ended or if the walls were even still there. The silence had changed, too. It had become a presence. Thick and wet and close to my skin, like something was standing inches away, breathing in rhythm with me. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The hum was back, but deeper now, guttural, almost like a growl echoing through a drainpipe. It came from the closet. Still open. Still waiting. I knew I couldn't stand still forever. The room would shift if I did, of that I was certain. The house was patient. It would grow around me, consume me quietly, like ivy covering forgotten bones. So I stepped forward, hands stretched in the dark, and let memory lead. My fingers grazed the edge of the old dresser, the sharp corner of the toy chest I used to hide behind when my father's voice turned to thunder. Everything was in the right place, which made it worse. The accuracy was too cruel. I had forgotten the details, yet the house had not. When I reached the closet, the air was different again, colder, but stale, as if it had been trapped for years and was only now exhaling. The scent was familiar in the worst way, damp cardboard, dust, and the faintest trace of blood gone old and dry. I touched the closet door with the tips of my fingers and felt its breath on my palm. It wasn't just a storage space. It was a mouth. I stepped inside. Darkness gave way to something stranger. Not light, but a kind of dim awareness. The closet stretched impossibly deep, far beyond the dimensions of my childhood room. Each step forward took me farther from the world I knew, and the walls on either side were lined not with clothes but with versions of me. Polaroids, thousands of them, pinned in rows from floor to ceiling. Each image captured a moment, me hiding under a table. Me covering my ears in the bathtub, me staring at a crack in the wall. Some of the photos were torn. Others were burned around the edges. A few had deep scratches carved across the face. But all of them were silent witnesses. I moved slowly, eyes scanning the images, heart thudding in my chest. The further I walked, the younger the photos became. Toddler. Infant. Newborn. Ultrasound. Then there were no more photos. Only walls. And the sound of someone breathing behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Instead, I whispered, "Why did you bring me here?" The voice that answered wasn't human. It scraped against language like something learning to speak through broken glass. "Because you left it inside." My knees buckled, and I caught myself against the wall. The pictures were gone. The wall was now a mirror, and in it, I saw myself, but not as I was. My reflection was thinner, hunched, wrapped in my old childhood blanket like armor. The reflection moved its lips and I heard nothing, but I understood. It mouthed a name I had tried to forget. Mom. The mirror shattered inward without warning, and behind it was another hallway, this one entirely red. Not painted red, but soaked in a rust-colored hue that pulsed faintly like a wound. The carpet squished underfoot again, and the walls dripped slowly, rhythmically. I walked, because there was nothing else to do. The air tasted like copper. My mouth was dry. Halfway down the corridor, I began to hear it again, the lullaby from the mobile in the pink room. Slower now, warped, almost pleading. It pulled me forward, and then I saw her. My mother stood at the end of the hallway, her back to me. She wore the robe I remembered, the one with little embroidered flowers down the sleeves, but it was stained, torn at the hem, clinging to her frame like a shroud. Her head tilted slightly to one side, the way it always did when she'd been crying too long. I didn't speak at first. I was afraid of breaking her. But she turned before I had the chance. Her eyes were hollow. Not metaphorically, literally. Deep, empty sockets stared through me. Her mouth opened, and for a moment, I thought she would scream. But what came out was the hum. The same sound the house had made since the beginning. She was part of it. Or maybe she always had been. I reached out to her. "Mom, why did you stay?" She didn't answer with words. Instead, her face began to shift, slowly, then all at once. Her features twisted, folding inward like clay melting under heat. Her skin peeled in layers, revealing bruises beneath, old and fresh, stacked like sediment. Her mouth opened wider than it should have, cracking at the edges, and from it spilled not words, but photographs. Hundreds of them. Each one a moment she didn't protect me. Each one a silence. Each one a lie. I fell to my knees, the photos pooling around me like snow, cold and sharp. Some showed her turning away. Others showed her frozen in place. But none showed her stopping him. When I looked up, she was gone. Only the hallway remained, and at the far end, a door pulsing faintly with light. This one wasn't like the others. It was covered in locks, dozens of them, each one shaped like an eye. As I approached, they began to blink. And then they began to open. The blinking locks followed me with the indifferent gaze of something ancient, as though they were less eyes and more memories crystallized into shape, each one a moment that had seen, that had known, and done nothing. I stood in front of the door and waited for it to stop watching, but it didn't. I could feel their judgment behind the stairs, not cruel, but cold, like the passive cruelty of furniture in a room where something terrible happened. The kind of cruelty that doesn't scream, that doesn't run, it just stays still and lets it happen again and again. My hand moved before I was ready. I reached for the central lock, the largest one, the one that seemed to dilate when I neared. As my fingers touched it, something behind the door exhaled, a deep and hollow breath like air rushing through a vent that had been sealed for decades. The lock pulsed under my skin, warm, alive, resisting, until finally it clicked open with a wet sound. The others followed in sequence, each one blinking once before unlocking, as if acknowledging me, as if letting me in was part of a ritual the house had waited years to complete. When the final eye shut itself, the door cracked open. Not wide. Just enough for me to squeeze through. Inside, the air changed again, thick with mildew and static, a humid current that clung to my skin like invisible fingers. The room beyond wasn't a room. It was a space without shape, like a basement that had forgotten how to be one. The floor was uneven, made of warped wood and sodden carpet that squelched with each step. The ceiling sloped awkwardly, too low in places, too high in others. The walls were not walls, they were draped sheets, stained with shadow. Behind them, shapes moved. I didn't ask who was there. I already knew. These were the pieces of my father I had buried but never grieved. Not just his face or his voice, but the aftershocks. The version of me that flinched at sudden noises. The version that couldn't sleep unless the door was locked, the window covered, the night light on. The version that smiled at men out of fear, not kindness. The shapes behind the sheets whispered in voices that all sounded like him, overlapping. A single line repeated through a dozen mouths. Why do you always make me do this? The worst part was that the space trembled underfoot. In the center of the room was a chair. Not just any chair. The chair. The one from the kitchen. The one I used to sit in while he talked at me, not to me. I stared at it for a long time before I noticed the straps. Thin leather cuffs hung from the arms and legs, buckled, dark with old stains. My stomach turned. I remembered stories he used to tell me, not fairy tales, but lessons. Lessons about obedience, about how a child must learn pain to understand love. And there was always the chair. The lesson chair. I wanted to run, but the door behind me was gone. The hum returned, not mechanical this time, but human. It came from the air itself, vibrating through my spine. I turned and saw her, the girl. The version of me that had remained in the pink room. She stepped into the space barefoot, her nightgown dripping as if she'd climbed out of a flood. Her eyes were wide and dry. She didn't blink. She walked to the chair and sat down slowly, deliberately, without resistance. Her wrists slid into the cuffs like it was instinct. She looked at me, and this time, she spoke. "You left me here." I shook my head. "I didn't know how to take you with me." She tilted her head. "That wasn't your choice." Behind her, the shadows rippled. A figure moved behind one of the sheets. Not fully visible. Just the silhouette of a man with long arms and a square jaw. I could feel my heartbeat in my teeth. My younger self didn't flinch. She simply waited, resigned. I ran to her. The straps melted away as I reached out, pulling her from the chair. Her skin was cold and sticky, like she'd been asleep in water. She looked up at me, mouth twitching with something between a smile and a grimace. "I'm tired." "I know," I whispered. "But we can leave." "No," she said softly, "you can leave. I have to stay. This is where the house keeps the parts it can't use." I held her tighter. The room began to collapse inward. The sheets tore, revealing the figures behind them, not just one man, but many. All of them versions of him. Not physically identical, but shaped by the same violence. The same voice. The same presence that lingered in doorways and stared too long. Each wore a smile that meant pain. They moved forward together, like a tide of everything I'd tried to forget. I picked the girl up and ran. There was no exit. No hallway. Just a door painted into a wall, flat, fake, symbolic. I slammed into it anyway, and the wood gave way like paper. On the other side was a staircase, spiraling upward. I didn't look back. We climbed for what felt like hours. Each step shifted beneath us, sometimes carpeted, sometimes steel, sometimes glass. The walls around the staircase showed flashes of memories, holidays, hospitals, hiding places. Things that weren't bad on their own, but became unbearable under the weight of repetition, of context. We climbed in silence, until finally, we reached a landing. A single door stood there. No eyes. No locks. Just a door. The girl touched my hand. "This one only opens if you remember." "Remember what?" She stared at me with eyes too old for her face. "What happened the last time you ran?" I closed my eyes. And remembered. The door didn't open with a creak or a groan. It simply yielded, as if it had been waiting all this time, not for me, but for the moment when I could finally bear the truth. On the other side was the dining room. Not a distorted one like before, but the actual room from my childhood, untouched by time. The same yellow wallpaper with faint flower patterns. The same heavy table with a shallow gouge in the surface where a knife once slipped. The same chairs, except one, the one he sat in, was missing. My mother was at the table, folding napkins with robotic care, over and over, though they never accumulated. My brother sat beside her, younger, maybe 9, eyes fixed downward at a plate that held nothing. Neither of them looked at me. Neither of them looked at each other. This was how it had been, when he was angry, when he was loud, when he was silent. Especially when he was silent. That was the most dangerous time. When every sound in the house became a risk. The creak of a chair leg, the clink of a fork, a cough, all triggers. It wasn't about what you did. It was about what you were. Noise was crime. I stepped closer, and the scene did not flinch. My mother kept folding napkins. My brother kept staring at nothing. I whispered, "Please, do something." My mother blinked. Slowly. Mechanically. "It's easier if you don't talk." My brother spoke without looking up. "He doesn't like when we talk." "But he's not here," I said. The house disagreed. I heard the footsteps. Not just from above or below, but from inside the walls. Slow, deliberate. Measured steps that knew where every board would groan. I turned, but there was no one. Just the thud of approaching memory. "You remember now," said my mother, still folding. "The day you ran. It was summer. A heat wave had soaked the air, thick and angry. My brother had spilled juice on the carpet. That was all. No shouting, no backtalk, just a stain. And that night, he got the belt. Not for the juice, but for being slow to apologize. For making excuses. I had stood there, frozen, watching my mother hold her breath and stare at the corner where the wall met the ceiling, as if looking too closely would make her complicit. When it was over, I tried to comfort him. He pushed me away, too ashamed to speak. That night, I packed a backpack. Toothbrush, crackers, flashlight, one sock. I left through the garage while the house slept. I walked 5 miles before an old woman watering her lawn asked where my parents were. She called the police. I was brought back. They didn't hit me that time. They didn't have to. They just made sure I knew what I'd done. My mother wept in silence, saying I'd scared her. My father held me too tight when he hugged me. "You don't get to scare your mother like that," he said, voice soft and final. "You're not the only one who's hurting." And so I stayed. I learned to be still. To smile at nothing. To watch the clock, not for freedom, but for danger. "I'm sorry," I said aloud, and the room wavered. The walls pulsed. The wallpaper peeled in strips. The table splintered down the center. My mother dissolved into dust, her napkins folding themselves. My brother shrank until he became a doll, one I cracked and painted over. I picked him up, and his mouth opened. "We're all just rooms in him." "What?" "Mom, me, you. Just rooms he left his weight in." I looked up. The house had changed again. No longer my home, but a composite. Hallways and staircases and bedrooms from every place we had lived, all folded together into a labyrinth of memory and fear. The walls groaned as if under pressure. The floor sloped downward, drawing me in. The house wasn't haunted. It was the haunting. A living monument to everything we never said. I carried the doll, my brother, and followed the decline. Lights flickered. Carpet turned to concrete. Paint peeled until the walls were bare. At the bottom of the slope, there was a furnace. Massive. Industrial. Out of place in a domestic structure. It breathed like a beast, expelling hot gusts of air from rusted vents. Above the furnace, nailed into the beam, hung the missing chair. I approached slowly. The doll in my hands began to hum. The same lullaby. It became harder to breathe. Beside the furnace was a small hatch in the wall. I opened it without knowing why. Inside, there was a shoebox. Dusty, untouched, sealed with string. My hands shook as I undid the knot. Inside were things only I would recognize: a broken crayon, a strip of carpet, a torn photo of me and my brother with our faces scratched out, and a cassette tape labeled "Be Good." I inserted the tape into the old recorder that appeared beside the box, as if the house had provided it. I pressed play. Static. Then his voice. Not yelling. Not angry. Just normal. Explaining why he did what he did. Why punishment was love. Why he was sorry we made it necessary. It was worse than screaming. Because it made the walls nod in agreement. I threw the tape into the furnace. The hum stopped. The doll melted in my arms. I screamed, not in fear, but in fury. A sound I had swallowed for decades. The house shook. Somewhere above, glass shattered. And a new door opened. This one bled light. Not fire. Not blood. Just light. The new door stood unlike the others, not because of its shape or design, but because of its refusal to bear weight. It seemed to float just above the floor, its frame glowing faintly from within as though the light came not from a bulb or a fire, but from something older, softer, something like breath. For the first time, the air carried no rot, no iron, no threat. It was clean, almost sweet, like the ghost of lilacs on a forgotten breeze. I hesitated before touching the handle, not out of fear of pain, but fear of change, because part of me knew this was a door the house didn't build to trap me. It was one I built myself. When I stepped through, I found no room, no hallway, no space at all in the traditional sense. Instead, I stood in a liminal passage of gray, with no corners, no edges, just a sense of forward motion underfoot. The surface was soft like worn canvas, neither floor nor ground, and above me floated shapes that flickered and dissolved before I could name them. It felt like standing inside the blankness between memories, that strange purgatory between moments where nothing happened and everything hurt anyway. The kind of silence that could last a lifetime. I walked slowly, uncertain whether I was moving at all, until the light shifted and revealed a figure ahead, not waiting, but simply being, a woman, her back turned, her posture straight and thin like the spine of a book no one dared to open. I knew her immediately, though she hadn't turned around. It was my mother, but not as I remembered her. This version stood unburdened, her hair long and unbrushed, her housecoat unbuttoned at the collar, her feet bare. She looked as though she had wandered in from a life where she had never been afraid, where the dinner table was not a battleground and she did not have to choose silence to survive. I stepped closer and felt the weight of my childhood push against my chest, that pressure of unspoken things that had stretched between us for decades. She didn't turn to look at me, but she spoke in a voice I had never heard from her in life. I wanted to speak, she said, but the house made silence feel like safety. I stopped behind her, not daring to breach the final distance. You let him. Her shoulders twitched, not quite a wince, not quite denial. I did. But only because I thought it would end faster if I didn't get in the way. I thought, if I absorbed it all, if I smiled, if I stayed small, maybe he would forget you. I felt tears forming without the heat of emotion, just coldness leaking from the root. He never forgot. No, she said, turning slightly so I could see the edge of her face in profile. He remembered everything. Especially where it hurt. We stood in silence again, but this time the silence wasn't cruel. It was thick with the possibility of understanding, not forgiveness, not absolution, just acknowledgement. She finally turned to face me, and I saw the lines around her mouth, the distant sadness that had never quite settled into grief, only into habit. She reached into her pocket and handed me something small and heavy, a key. Plain, iron, rusted. I looked down at it, confused, but she spoke again before I could ask. You already know what it opens. And then she was gone, not vanished, not ripped away, just slowly dissolving into the soft air like mist folding into itself. The key grew heavier in my hand the longer I held it, and I realized it wasn't made of metal at all. It was made of memory. My fingers ached as I gripped it, and every nerve in my arm buzzed with recognition. I continued walking. The corridor shifted, bent, narrowed, until it formed into a recognizable shape, a hallway from our old house, the last one before we left. The one where the air always smelled faintly of vinegar and rage. At the end of it was the study. His study. The room we were never allowed to enter, the one with locked drawers and drawn curtains, where he spent hours doing things he never explained. The door was still there, untouched by time, and when I pressed the key into the lock, it resisted for a heartbeat. Not because it didn't fit, but because it did. Too well. The house didn't want me here, not truly. This was the deepest room. The heart of it. The core wound. The key turned, slow and stubborn, until the bolt snapped open. The study was too clean. That was the first thing I noticed. The desk was polished. The shelves alphabetized. The blinds perfectly angled to let in the kind of golden light that softens guilt. On the walls were family photos, but not real ones. These had been altered. My father smiled in every one, but it wasn't his real smile. It was the practiced one he wore for other people, the one that made teachers and co-workers and churchgoers say how lucky we were, what a kind man he was, how charming, how devoted. In every photo, we smiled too. Me, my brother, my mother. All of us baring teeth like animals learning how to mimic affection. I crossed to the desk. It opened without a sound. Inside were pages and pages of notes, not in his handwriting, but mine. Journals I had long forgotten. Pages I had written and ripped out and burned, or so I thought. But here they were, preserved. The confessions. The dreams. The things I had only dared to think. I flipped through them, each one heavier than the last, until I reached the final page. It read, "This is the room he built inside me. It will never be safe." Something clicked inside the wall. A panel slid open, revealing a mirror. Not glass. Not silvered. Just a surface that reflected not appearance but presence. I saw him there. Not the man as I remembered, but the shape he had carved into me. A hollow figure, stitched from moments. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stared with the weight of 1,000 silences. I stepped toward the mirror. I did not smash it. I did not scream. Instead, I sat down in the chair at the desk, took a deep breath, and began writing a new page. The chair groaned beneath me, not in protest but in recognition, as though it remembered the weight of my father, of silence, of all the years we sat and did not speak. The desk remained open, the journal before me half filled with the words I had never dared to say aloud. I pressed the pen to paper and let it move, not with force but with gravity, as though the truth had its own momentum, its own mass. I didn't try to write anything profound. I simply wrote what the house had made me remember, that pain nests quietly, that silence has a sound, and that sometimes the sharpest blade is the one disguised as love. As I wrote, the study began to change. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. A painting on the wall faded. The wood of the bookshelf darkened like it had absorbed smoke. A fine crack spread across the surface of the mirror, as if my reflection had blinked and found itself unworthy. Behind me, the room breathed. That's the only word I can use. The walls inhaled and exhaled, and with each breath, the air grew heavier, saturated with the dust of unspoken years. I stood slowly, my legs numb, and took the journal with me. The moment I stepped outside the study, the door slammed shut, not by wind or pressure but by will. I didn't try to reopen it. Some rooms, once seen clearly, don't need revisiting. The hallway beyond had shifted again, not into another room, but into a corridor made of things I had forgotten. My childhood drawings, crumpled and torn, lined the walls like decaying wallpaper. Scraps of fabric from blankets I once clung to. A single mitten. A toy missing an eye. And through all of it, that low hum, the lullaby he used to whistle through his teeth, the one that meant danger was on its way. As I walked, the house began to resist me more openly. The floors warped beneath my steps, curling upward like dry skin. The walls grew tight, narrowing the space until my shoulders grazed both sides. Doors appeared that led nowhere, open them and find only more doors, smaller, tighter, more suffocating. The house was defending itself now, not out of malice, but survival. I was unmaking it with every step forward. Every word written. Every truth remembered. It wanted me to forget again. It wanted me small. It wanted me mute. But I had walked too far and spoken too much. The corridor ended at the basement door, the one I had avoided all my life, the one we pretended didn't exist. In the real house, it had always been locked. My father said it was unfinished. My mother said there was nothing down there worth seeing. But in dreams, I had seen the edges of it. Dark stairs. Wet stone. The sound of something breathing. Now it stood open, the air pouring out in slow, invisible waves that made the skin on my arms prickle and burn. I stepped through and began to descend, each step echoing longer than the one before, as if time itself stretched down here. The basement wasn't one room. It was a cathedral of forgotten things. Stacks of old furniture, covered in sheets, lined the walls like sleeping sentinels. The floor was cold and slick, but not with water, something thicker, like the residue of grief. On the far wall, scrawled in something black and permanent, were the words, "He made me like this." Beneath it, a mirror. This one didn't reflect anything. It simply absorbed. When I stood before it, I saw only darkness. But I felt something watching, pressing against the glass like a face too close to be seen. A voice filled the space, not his, but my own, younger, shaking, saying, "Please stop." And then his voice, louder, crueler, saying, "You made me do this." I covered my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It came from within. A cacophony of moments I had buried, layered one atop the other like sediment. The first time he called me a mistake. The first time he slammed a door so hard I thought the house would split. The first time I realized my mother wasn't going to intervene. All of it replayed now, but not as memory, as presence. These were not echoes. They were the bones of the house. I turned from the mirror and found a door I hadn't seen before, small, narrow, child-sized. It was already ajar, and behind it I saw a room lit only by a single bare bulb swinging from the ceiling. I crawled through, scraping my knees, and emerged into a space that looked like no room I had ever known, and yet was instantly familiar. It was built from all the moments I had spent hiding, under beds, behind furniture, in closets, behind locked bathroom doors. The walls were made of whispering. The floor was made of held breath. And at the center, a child sat with their back to me, rocking slowly, hands pressed to their ears. I stepped forward. The child didn't move. I knew it was me, not just symbolically but exactly. I knew the bones of that spine, the curl of those fingers, the invisible map of bruises that had long since faded from skin but not from sense memory. I knelt beside the child and whispered, "It's not your fault." The child did not turn. The rocking slowed. I placed the journal on the floor before them. "You were not born broken. You were broken by someone who told you that love was punishment." Still no response, but the air shifted. The walls sighed. The mirror in the basement cracked, not with violence, but with mercy. Then the house screamed. It wasn't a noise. It was a feel. Their eyes were mine, but without bitterness, only confusion. They spoke one word, "Leave." I nodded. They vanished. And the room collapsed. Not into ruin, but into truth. I crawled back through the narrow door and found the basement filling with light, not warm, not blinding, but clean. The mirror was gone. The furniture gone. The walls bare. And in the silence that followed, I felt something I hadn't felt since before I could name it. Space. The staircase back to the surface had changed. It was no longer steep or treacherous, but shallow, slow, as if to allow for hesitation, as if the house was asking, "Are you sure you want to keep going? Are you sure you're ready to know what this all has been?" The walls pulsed softly around me, no longer in resistance, but in mourning. I understood then that the house was not just built by him, not just built by pain. I had furnished it, too. I had helped maintain it by walking its halls again and again in my dreams, letting memory loop, letting silence calcify. I was no longer just a prisoner. I had become a keeper. At the top of the steps, I emerged not into a hallway, not a room, but into a space I did not recognize. It was vast, nearly horizonless, like the inside of a forgotten train station, or an airport terminal emptied out long before its time. A liminal space, massive and featureless, the kind of place where you could walk forever and still feel like you hadn't arrived. The floor was tiled with linoleum the color of paper smoke. The lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows from no objects. There were no chairs. No benches. No exits. And yet, in the center of it all, there stood a single doorframe, freestanding, without walls to support it. Through it, nothing. Just darkness. Not ominous, just void. I approached it slowly. Every footstep echoed back softer than the last, as if the very air was thick with expectation, or grief. As I got closer, I noticed a small plaque on the doorframe. I knelt to read it. The words were barely etched, more suggestion than script. It said, "The room without a name." I didn't remember this place, not specifically, but something in me did, a sensation, a phantom tension in my shoulders, like remembering how to brace for impact. This was the room he had tried to erase. The one memory no one had ever spoken of, not even in anger, not even in nightmares. This was the place where my brother stopped being a child. I stepped through. It was not a room. It was a moment. Frozen. Preserved. Like amber sealing the last breath of a crushed fly. In it, I saw my brother, not as he was, not as he became, but as he could have been. Laughing. Sitting cross-legged on the carpet with a handful of toy soldiers. His voice filled the space, light and unbroken, calling to me to play, just once. Behind him, I saw the figure of our father step into the room, slow and shadowed. I wanted to scream, to intervene, but I knew I couldn't. This wasn't memory, it was the wound itself, stitched into the bones of the house. A loop not of action, but of silence. I turned away. There was a mirror in this room too, though I hadn't seen it at first. It was small, square, the kind you might hang in a hallway for a final glance before leaving. But when I looked in it, I didn't see myself. I saw my brother. Older. Empty. His eyes like dried riverbeds. The way he looked the last time I saw him before he disappeared from our lives for good. He didn't speak, but the mirror fogged slightly, as though his breath were trapped behind the glass. A single word formed in the mist, "Run." But I didn't. Instead, I sat in the center of the floor, in the stillness of the room that had no name, and I did what no one ever had. I said his name out loud. Elliot. It echoed through the house. Not loud, not violent, just final. And the walls of the moment cracked. The floor split, not open, but inward, like a lung deflating. The memory released itself, no longer able to hold its shape. I stood as the vision dissolved, leaving behind no image, no proof. Only the scent of plastic and warm carpet and the hollow stillness of after. Back outside the frame, the space had changed again. Now there were doors. Dozens. Hundreds. Each one different, made of different woods and metals and colors. Some had names. Some had symbols. Some wept quietly. Others stood proud. Each one, I knew, led to a part of myself, a version of me created to survive. The coward. The pleaser. The ghost. The liar. The protector. The dreamer. The judge. And far at the center, one door made entirely of black glass, with nothing written upon it. That door, I knew, led to the version of me that had not yet been created, the one who could live after the house. I walked past the others, though some of them called to me. The judge told me not to forget. The ghost asked me to stay. The pleaser offered comfort. But I shook them off. I had worn their faces long enough. When I reached the final door, I paused. There was no handle. Only a keyhole. I reached into my pocket, half expecting the rusted key to be gone, but it remained. I slipped it into the lock. The door didn't open. It shattered. Not violently, not with sound. It simply disintegrated like sugar in water. Beyond it, not light, not darkness. Just potential. I stepped through, and the house screamed one last time, not in pain, but in release. The scream was not from the walls or the floors or the memory. It was from me, not my throat, but the many of me that had lived here all these years. The scream that had been caught behind my teeth for a lifetime. The scream of the boy who didn't run, the boy who stayed, the boy who learned to disappear without leaving. And once it was out, once it echoed into that endless, shifting space, I found myself standing not in a dream, but in a memory I had never known. A quiet morning. No shouting. Just light through the blinds and the smell of dust and nothing to be afraid of. For the first time, I was alone. And it was safe. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke in the hallway again, the hallway, the one I knew best, the one that stretched infinitely while always doubling back. It smelled like wet drywall and stale laundry, like something left behind too long. The light was dim, not from bulbs, but from a colorless haze that clung to the ceiling like cobwebs. My footsteps made no sound now. The floor had softened. There were no more doors here, only picture frames, each one fogged or blank, the images within erased by time or will or both. I moved slowly, hand brushing the wall for balance, until I heard it, his voice. It came from behind me first. Then ahead. Then everywhere. Not loud, not yelling, but worse, a measured, casual tone. The voice he used when pretending to be calm, just before the snap. "You've always been so dramatic," it said. "It wasn't that bad. You've made it worse than it was." The words were so familiar I could feel them shape my posture, bending my spine, forcing my chin down. "Your memory is a story," the voice continued. "And stories lie." I stopped walking. My breath was short. My chest tight. Not fear, but anger. A dull, old anger like a bruise pressed too hard. "No," I said quietly. The hallway trembled. "I'm not the liar." Something cracked. Not in the walls, but in the air itself, like the sound of glass breaking behind your eyes. The frames on the wall began to clear, not all at once, but in pulses. Images returned, me, my brother, our mother, all frozen in moments of false calm. Birthday parties with no guests. Christmas mornings with dry eyes. Dinners where no one chewed. I reached up and touched one, and the image melted like oil under heat. Beneath it, a second picture emerged. The real moment, the one we weren't allowed to see. My mother flinching. My brother looking away. My hands beneath the table, clenched so tightly the skin had split. I kept walking. The voice followed. It sounded more uncertain now, like an old recording degrading. "You're remembering it wrong," it muttered. "I gave you everything. And then, I kept this house together." The hallway split suddenly, like a tree branch, and I was forced to choose left or right. Both directions led into darkness. Both felt wrong. But I remembered something: the house never gave you what you wanted. It only gave you what you feared. So I turned and walked backward, retracing my steps, not toward the voice, but away from the choice. The moment I did, a third path opened beneath me. I fell. Not through space, but through self. I landed in the living room, the original one, untouched, unshifted. The same torn couch. The same sun-bleached carpet. The TV still warm from use, though I hadn't touched it in years. On it, static played, the image of an empty hallway flickering in black and white. In front of the screen, a shape sat slouched in the armchair, the shape of him. Not his face. Not his features. Just his outline. It was built of smoke and memory, and when it breathed, I felt the floor tighten beneath my feet. "I made you strong," it said. You're welcome. You made me silent, I replied. It didn't move, but its shape grew sharper, like a threat leaning forward. Do you think this changes anything? All this, wandering through shadows? Do you think grief cares about your metaphors? Its voice changed as it spoke, blending into my mother's cadence, then my own, then back into his. You can't burn a house down when you live inside it. I looked around. Everything was real now. Tangible. Solid. I could touch the corner of the table, feel the familiar notch where I once split my chin. I could smell the pine cleaner he used to douse the furniture before company came. But I could also see the cracks behind the paint, the blood that had once dried on the molding, the way the light avoided the far wall entirely. It had never been a home. It had been a stage. You're right, I said. The figure shifted. I can't burn it down. I opened the journal again. I am the fire. The moment I wrote that, the house began to collapse, not in violence, but in shedding. The fake walls peeled away to reveal bare studs. The carpet dissolved into dust. The couch evaporated in layers, fabric to stuffing to frame to ash. The figure in the chair reached toward me, not with arms but with gravity, pulling at my legs, at my chest, at the part of me that still wanted to make it all make sense. I dropped the journal into the center of the floor. Keep it, I said. Choke on it. The floor caved. I didn't fall. I walked. I walked through the ruin, through the wreckage of all the symbols I had spent years trying to decode. The closed door. The locked cabinet. The cracked mirror. The silence after the scream. I walked until there was no structure left, just open air and the sense of something after. The landscape was empty, but not hollow. The house had gone. The house had been shed like old skin, like a mask so long worn I forgot it wasn't mine. And standing there, alone, I began to build, not from wood, not from guilt or memory, but from breath, from softness, from space. There was no sky, not yet. Just a wide plain of nothing, silver and soft and gently lit from no sun at all. The ground beneath my feet no longer creaked or shifted or whispered. It held me. It welcomed weight. For the first time, I could feel gravity as something kind. I didn't know how long I had been walking since the house fell away, hours, days, or maybe minutes stretched by memory, but I was no longer lost. I was not in a place anymore. I was in a possibility. I thought of my brother, not as a ghost but as a boy. Not the boy he became, full of retreat and flinch and silence, but the one who used to draw monsters with tiny smiles and call them good beasts. I remembered the way his eyes used to go wide when I read to him at night, how he used to reach for my hand in the dark, not because he was afraid of it, but because he thought I could hold it back. I remembered when we both still believed we had a mother. Not just someone in the kitchen, but a real mother, one who would stop him, protect us, see us. But she never did. And even now, her absence was louder than his violence ever was. I sat down on the plane. My shadow pooled around me like ink. I looked into it. In it, I saw the house again, only this time it was small. Not looming or breathing. A model. A dollhouse. I reached down and picked it up. It fit in my palm. Every crooked hallway. Every locked door. Every staircase to nowhere. All of it, a thing I could hold. A thing I could put down. I opened it like a box. Inside, instead of rooms, there were scraps of paper, memories, half-truths, fragments of phrases, "Don't tell anyone. He's just tired. You always ruin things. This is your fault." I unfolded them one by one, reading them aloud, and as I did, they turned to dust. They didn't vanish. They disintegrated with time and air and voice. When I was done, I placed the empty house on the ground and walked away. I didn't look back to see if it remained. It didn't matter anymore. I began to build. Not from trauma, not from metaphor, not from inherited fear. I built from what I chose to keep, the night I ran into the woods and breathed like I had lungs for the first time. The time my brother and I laughed so hard we choked on our own breath. The rare days my mother looked almost human and asked me if I wanted to leave. The dream I had at age 12 of floating in a house made of glass and sun. The first poem I ever wrote, and the fact I didn't show it to anyone. The quiet. I built slowly. Deliberately. No corners. Only gentle curves and open spaces. A room for sadness, with soft walls and no clocks. A room for anger, with a door you could slam and no one would punish you for it. A room for silence, for memories that had no words. A window that opened to something alive. And at the center, not a mirror, but a seed, a small white seed I planted with no promise of bloom, only the hope that one day, something else might grow. I did not make a house to hide in. I made one to return to. And as I stood in the middle of it, the wind moved for the first time. I turned. My brother stood at the edge of the horizon, just a shape, a shadow in motion. I didn't run to him. I didn't call his name. I just held the door open. And whether it was really him, or just a memory finally healed enough to walk upright, it didn't matter. He came closer. He stepped inside. He sat beside me. No words. No explanation. Just the soft sound of breath in a room that did not demand anything of us. We existed. And it was enough. Far away, I could still hear the echo of the old house, crumbling forever in a place I no longer needed to visit. It would go on collapsing without me. But it could not follow me here. Not into the house that had no violence in its walls, no shame in its floors, no corners for secrets to hide. And when I finally slept, I dreamed of something simple. Light coming through the curtains. The smell of rain on warm wood. A voice saying, "You made it out." And for once, I believed it. He waits at the fence. I was 12 the first time I saw him, and I've been trying to forget him ever since, though I know now forgetting is not the same as escape. Back then we lived in a weather-beaten 2-story house at the edge of Elmsbrook, a town so small the grocery store still closed early on Sundays and the only entertainment was watching thunderstorms roll in over the pines. Our house backed onto a slope of woods that went down into an old gully full of poison ivy, raccoons, and the occasional coyote. My room overlooked the backyard, a narrow patch of yellowing grass fenced off by sagging chain link, beyond which the trees seemed to huddle like they were whispering secrets. My father had built the fence himself the summer before, swearing every time he nicked his thumb or twisted a wire too tight, calling it the line between us and the wild, though he never explained what he meant by that. Maybe he knew more than he let on. Or maybe he was just drunk when he said it. It happened in late August, the air thick and breathless, the cicadas buzzing so loudly it felt like my skull was full of wires. That night I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of Duke, our old golden retriever, barking like mad in the backyard. It wasn't the usual bark he used when he wanted to come in or chase a squirrel. This was sharp, panicked, every syllable a cry. I blinked sleep out of my eyes and shuffled to the window, expecting to see a possum waddling along the fence line or, at worst, one of the neighborhood kids pulling a prank. What I saw instead froze me to the marrow. There was a man, or something like a man, standing at the edge of the woods, right behind the fence. Not moving. Just there. At first I thought maybe it was a scarecrow someone had thrown up as a joke, but no, the arms hung wrong, long and narrow, jointed too low, fingers dangling like wet strings. He was tall. Way too tall. At least 7 feet. He wore a coat or cloak or maybe something in between. Dark, flat, the kind of black that doesn't reflect light. His face, if you could call it that, was chalk white and bald, featureless except for 2 deep, dark hollows where eyes should have been. There was no gleam in them, no red reflection from the porch light, just darkness, pure and absolute, like the sockets were windows into somewhere else. I stood there, paralyzed, my breath shallow. He didn't move. Didn't twitch. Even the air around him felt wrong. Still. Empty. Like he wasn't part of our world at all. I whispered, "Dad," but it came out more like a squeak. I turned and bolted down the hall in my socks, heart pounding, and shook my father awake. "There's someone out back," I hissed. "By the fence. He's watching Duke." My dad groaned, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and stumbled after me in his boxer shorts. By the time we got to the window, the figure was gone. Duke was pacing in circles, whining. My dad narrowed his eyes, muttered something about me having too much imagination, and went out with a flashlight, grumbling under his breath. He checked the gate. Still locked. He checked the woods, the perimeter, even down by the old pine where Duke sometimes buried things. Nothing. "Probably just a deer or a damn trash panda," he said as he came back in, shining the light on Duke's fur. "Go back to sleep. You're fine." I lay in bed, covers pulled up to my nose, listening to the wind stir the trees. Every sound felt sharper. Closer. I swore I could hear footsteps pacing just outside the window, slow and deliberate, but when I looked again, there was nothing. Only the trees, and Duke curled at the door, growling low in his throat. The next morning, Duke was gone. My father searched the yard 3 times, even called the neighbors. No sign of a dugout hole beneath the fence, no broken links, no blood, no fur, just his chain collar lying near the back gate, twisted like it had been yanked off with force. My mother said maybe he got scared by a coyote and ran. I didn't argue, but I knew better. I could still see the way Duke had stared at the tree line, tail tucked, barking like he was trying to hold back something bigger than himself. The weeks passed. School started. I tried to forget. Told myself it was a dream, that I'd been half asleep, that kids imagine things. But at night I started keeping the curtains closed. Every time I passed a window I felt like I was being watched, like if I looked too long into the woods I'd see him again, waiting. I started flinching at loud noises. I avoided the backyard completely. My parents thought I was just being a moody kid, but the truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had marked me that night. It took 4 years before he came back. 4 years of uneasy dreams, of waking up with the covers kicked off and my chest tight, of always glancing over my shoulder without knowing why. By then I was 16, working part-time at a pizza shop downtown, saving up for a car. I'd taken the bus home one night, and it dropped me off 2 blocks from my house. It was just after midnight, and the streetlights were out on our block. I didn't think much of it at first. The power went out a lot around there. But when I turned the corner onto our street, I stopped dead in my tracks. He was there. Standing in someone else's backyard this time, behind their fence, facing the sidewalk. Same height. Same coat. Same sunken black eye holes. Just standing there under the starlight like he belonged. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. For a moment I hoped maybe it was a statue, or a shadow, or my brain playing tricks on me, but then his head turned. Not fast, not slow, just a slow mechanical swivel like a puppet being moved by invisible strings. He looked at me. And even though I couldn't see eyes, I felt them lock onto me. Something cold slid down my spine, and without thinking, I ran. I didn't stop until I was inside, door locked, back against the wall, heart hammering. 3 days later, my mother was laid off from her job at the bank. Downsizing, they said. Just business. But she didn't take it well. She started sleeping in late, not showering, barely eating. The brightness in her eyes dimmed. My father started working double shifts to make ends meet, but we all knew the bills were getting heavier. The house started to feel smaller. Colder. We sold it 6 months later and moved into a cramped apartment near the freeway. I never told them what I saw. What was the point? They would never believe me. But I believed it. Because I knew. He had come back, and something terrible followed, just like before. And deep down, I knew he wasn't done. We moved in winter. The kind of bitter, gray January that sunk into your skin no matter how many layers you wore. The apartment was on the second floor of a concrete complex near the edge of town, surrounded by other buildings just like it, bleak, box-shaped, and coated in a dusting of road salt. The windows groaned when the wind blew, and the heating worked when it felt like it. I remember helping my father unload the truck, watching his breath curl in the cold, his face hollowed by exhaustion. My mother didn't speak much that day. She just stood in the doorway holding a lamp and looking like she didn't remember what it was for. For a while, he didn't come back. I started to think maybe the move had done it, like we'd somehow outrun him. Life didn't exactly get better, but it became tolerable. I started community college, took night classes, stacked pizza boxes by day, tried to forget. But something in me had changed. I noticed things. Noticed when shadows didn't move the way they should. Noticed when people in crowds paused too long, as if listening to something only they could hear. I'd scan tree lines for figures. I'd wake at odd hours and check the windows. And sometimes, only sometimes, I'd find them open when I was certain I'd closed them. Still, for nearly 3 years, he didn't come. Then, when I was 19, he appeared again. It was just after dusk on a fog-thick April evening. I had just finished a shift and decided to take the long way home, walking along the bike trail behind the strip mall. The fog clung low to the ground like spilled smoke, muting the world around me. I was listening to a voicemail from my mom, something about rent being late, her voice brittle with worry, when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a power box or a fallen post. But then I noticed the shape. The narrow frame. The tilt of the head. He was standing just off the trail, where the woods began again, framed in the fog like a photograph someone had tried to burn but couldn't. I stopped walking. Didn't even breathe. My phone slipped from my hand and landed with a muffled thud in the damp leaves. His head tilted slightly, just like before. Not fast. Almost curious. There was no wind, no sound. Just us, me, shaking, heart beating like a wound, and him, impossibly still. I turned and ran. No hesitation this time. I didn't care if anyone saw. I didn't care if I looked insane. I ran until I couldn't feel my legs, until my lungs felt like they'd filled with ice. When I reached my building, I slammed the door behind me and collapsed against it, gasping. I didn't even go back for my phone. The next morning, my friend Mike called from his number, told me he found my phone along the trail. Said I should be more careful, laughed it off. I was going to tell him. I almost did. But how could I? Hey Mike, remember the guy I told you about? The one who stares and doesn't move and appears before something horrible happens? Yeah, he's back. Good luck. I stayed home the rest of the day. Couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. At 6:23 p.m., my phone rang. It was Mike's mother. She was sobbing. Her words tumbled over each other like stones. Accident, hit head-on, didn't feel pain, gone instantly. Drunk driver. Wrong side of the road. No chance. I dropped the phone. I don't remember what I said. I just remember the silence that followed. It was the same silence I heard that night when I first saw him behind the fence, the kind that presses in and makes your ears ring like they're filled with water. I went to Mike's funeral 3 days later. I didn't cry during the service, not even when they showed the slideshow, not even when his sister sang. But that night, alone in my room, I screamed into my pillow until I went hoarse. He'd come back. And he'd taken something again. I tried to be rational. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe I just noticed these things more because I was looking for them. But that idea fell apart when I started seeing him more often. Always on the periphery. Always at a distance. Sometimes just a shape reflected in a window as I passed a storefront. Sometimes in crowds, easy to lose track of until you realized he never moved. I stopped going out. I started watching people through my peephole before unlocking the door. I bought blackout curtains. I covered mirrors. I started drawing him without meaning to. Scribbles in my notebooks during class. The long arms. The black holes for eyes. That bent head. Once I woke up with a sheet of printer paper crumpled in my hand, his outline scratched into it in trembling black ink, though I didn't remember getting out of bed. When I brought it up in therapy, hesitantly, cautiously, my counselor blinked twice and asked if I'd ever had a family history of mental illness. I lied. Said no. Said I was just stressed. She suggested I start taking something for anxiety. I nodded, agreed, left the office, and never went back. By 21, I barely spoke to anyone. My mother was distant. My father had moved in with someone new 2 towns over. My life had shrunk to a narrow path between work, home, and the grocery store, and even that felt dangerous. I thought about moving. About leaving the state. But it never felt like distance mattered. He always found me. Always appeared just when I started to feel safe again. One night I found a set of footprints outside my apartment building's fire escape. Long bare. No shoes. No tread. Just wide impressions in the snow, straight from the woods to the edge of my window. No one believed me then. They sure as hell won't believe me now. I don't blame them. If I hadn't seen him myself, if I hadn't felt what follows in his wake, I wouldn't believe it either. But I know. I know what's real. He waits. He watches. And every time I see him, something shatters. There came a point where I couldn't tell if I was unraveling because of him, or if I had simply broken under my own weight. Days bled into each other, sleepless nights strung together by caffeine and dread, my body wired, brittle, cracking beneath the quiet dread of always knowing, not wondering, knowing, that he would appear again. And when he did, the world around me would shift, would decay in some specific, targeted way, as if he wasn't just some stalker of flesh and shadow but a signal, a harbinger, a vector of collapse. I stopped telling anyone. Friends were long gone. My phone stayed off more than on. Even my mother, now living in a government-subsidized studio downtown, had started asking if I was hearing voices or getting enough sun. But she didn't want the truth. Nobody does. They want a shape that fits inside the word delusion. I began to notice patterns. Not just in when he showed up, but how he influenced the world around me. Every time I saw him, something fractured. But it wasn't always immediate. Sometimes the rot took time to show, like a splinter that festers beneath the skin. I'd seen him 3 weeks before my boss was found dead in his truck, engine still running, eyes open, a bullet through his mouth and the dashboard. That same week, a girl I'd gone on a few dates with, Kelly, was hospitalized for seizures that wouldn't stop. I'd only seen him once that time, behind the church fence near the post office. Just standing there. Watching. I almost convinced myself it wasn't him. Maybe I wanted it not to be. But a part of me knew, and when Kelly's sister called to tell me she'd gone into a coma, I didn't even react. Just sat there, phone against my ear, eyes on the window. He was outside. Not close, but there. Between the buildings, behind the dumpsters. At first, I only saw the shadow of him, a sliver of black against the sodium orange haze of the street lamp. But then the light flickered once, twice, and there he was. Same height. Same tilt of the head. I stared too long, I think. Something about him makes your mind want to give up. I remember my jaw trembling, not from fear but from the pure wrongness of looking at him, like I was seeing a cutout in the world, a place where nothing should be. Then the light blew out completely and he was gone. Just like that. I started keeping a journal. Not out of hope anyone would ever read it, but because writing things down made them feel lesser, like naming him could reduce his power. I drew the map of my sightings, marked times, dates, who got hurt after. I tried to find logic. Patterns. Geography. Maybe he only appeared near woods. Maybe it was the hour. The moon. Stress levels. Dreams. I tried everything. Correlated the data like I was solving a math problem. But it never aligned. He was chaos disguised as symmetry. A ghost with a schedule you could never predict until it was too late. Then came the night of the elevator. I'd taken the freight lift in the back of the building, the one that always groaned and stuttered between floors, because my hands were full of grocery bags and my shoulder was acting up again. I pressed 2. The doors shuttered closed. The lights dimmed. Then the elevator stopped between floors with a sick, low grind. I stood there in the yellow silence, bags at my feet, heart slowly rising. I pressed the alarm. Nothing. Pressed again. Then, softly, so softly, I heard it. Not breathing. Not footsteps. A hum. Low. Vibrating through the walls. It wasn't a melody. Not even tonal. Just a resonance. Like something enormous purring just outside perception. I backed into the corner. The walls pulsed. The lights flickered. And then I saw it, not through the door, but reflected in the greasy chrome of the panel beside the buttons. A shape. Inside with me. He was behind me. I turned, nearly falling. The space was empty. But I swear on my soul, in that moment, I felt watched. Not by eyes. By something deeper. Like a gaze made of pressure and weight. I dropped the groceries. Pressed the door open button over and over until finally the thing screeched into movement, stuttering to the second floor. I ran out and didn't stop until I was back in my room, door locked, lights off, every crevice sealed with towels and duct tape like that would stop him. I sat with my back against the wall and didn't move for hours. 3 days later, a neighbor down the hall jumped off the roof. I didn't know her well. But I saw the look in her eyes once, when we passed in the stairwell. She looked like me. Hollow. Hunted. I wondered if she'd seen him too. If she couldn't take it anymore. If I would end up the same. That was when I realized something else. Something worse. His visitations weren't always punishments. Sometimes, they were warnings. And other times, they were invitations. I started working nights at a warehouse outside town, quiet, mindless labor. Hauling pallets. Scanning boxes. The kind of job where no one talked much, where you could disappear in the echo of forklifts and fluorescent hum. I liked it that way. There, beneath the concrete and steel, he felt farther away. Maybe it was the machinery, the brutal, mechanical lifeblood of the place. Maybe it was just distraction. But part of me believed that wherever he lingered, it didn't like being near systems. He thrived on softness. Intimacy. He needed closeness. He needed cracks to seep through. I kept the journal with me at all times now. Folded tight in my coat pocket. Pages worn to near pulp, corners curled, ink smudged by sweat. It wasn't just notes anymore. It had turned into something else. A record. A map. A confession. I wrote everything, each sighting, every strange sound, every flicker of instinct that told me to turn around when I was alone. One night I wrote a single sentence over and over across 2 full pages: he doesn't follow. He arrives. I didn't even remember writing it. Just woke up on the break room couch, ink on my hands, the book open on my chest, the words staring back at me like a warning someone else had left. But the most terrifying thing began 2 weeks after that. He started showing up without me seeing him first. The first time was when Cal, one of the guys on night shift, went missing. Not just gone, but missing. No goodbyes. No bags packed. Car left in the lot, keys inside, wallet untouched. We joked at first, said maybe he won the lottery, maybe he skipped town, maybe he'd had enough of graveyard shifts and the endless clatter of rollers and scanners. But when HR started calling next of kin, we knew something was wrong. I didn't tell anyone that I'd seen Cal 2 nights before that. That he'd asked me something strange. "You ever get that feeling," he said while stacking totes beside me, "like someone's watching you, but not from far? Like they're already behind your eyes?" I paused. "You mean like déjà vu?" He shook his head. "Nah. Like, I dunno. Like you're just noticing something that was already there." I laughed it off. Told him to get some sleep. But he didn't laugh. Just looked at me with this hollow sort of stare and said, "Sometimes when I dream, there's someone standing at the fence by my old house. Same dream every time. I try to get closer, but I can't move." My blood went cold. I asked him, carefully, "Is he tall? Thin? Head tilted like he's listening?" Cal froze. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Then he just walked away. Didn't come back from break. I waited in the break room for 20 minutes, journal clutched like a Bible. When I checked the loading dock, his jacket was still on the hook. I never saw him again. And that was when I understood something I'd feared all along. He wasn't attached to me. He was spreading. I think I carried him like a sickness. A spore in my mind, and every time I told someone about him, drew him, thought about him too loud near someone else, I risked passing it on. Like some parasite that thrived on attention, on belief. And now Cal had seen him. Dreamed of him. And then vanished. I stopped talking. To anyone. I didn't even say hello to my shift manager. I wore headphones without music just so no one would try and chat. I burned the journal in the sink of my apartment at 3 a.m. one night, watched the ashes swirl down into the drain like soot-colored petals. But it didn't help. Because he was still with me. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and find all the cabinet doors open. Sometimes I'd find footprints on the carpet, bare, elongated, like someone dragging their toes. Once, I found a handprint on the inside of the bathroom mirror. A long-fingered, distorted smudge. I didn't own gloves. I lived alone. One night, while standing at the bus stop after work, I felt a shift in the air, like a vacuum had opened a mile away and was pulling my breath toward it. I turned and saw a woman waiting beside me, middle-aged, pinched expression, eyes red-rimmed with fatigue. But she wasn't looking at her phone or the schedule. She was looking straight past me. I followed her gaze. And there he was. Standing on the other side of the street. No fence. No barrier. Just shadow and shape in the sodium glare. Her voice came out in a whisper. "Do you see him too?" My mouth went dry. She blinked hard, shook her head, stepped back from the curb like she'd woken from sleep. "Sorry. Sorry." She left before the bus arrived. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. Not because of what she said, but because I realized I wasn't the only one anymore. He was growing. Feeding. Following others now, not just me. And every time I saw him, I wondered who would disappear next. Who would die? Who would be hollowed out from the inside and left behind like a burnt-out house with the lights still on? And I wondered, terrified, how many people I'd infected. It was sometime in early spring when I finally made the decision, no, the compulsion, to go back to the house. The house I grew up in, where I first saw him standing behind the backyard fence when I was 12. I hadn't stepped foot near that place in over a decade. The neighborhood had changed. The trees were older. The sky was smaller. But the dread had aged with me, deepened, sharpened into something like certainty. If I didn't go back, something worse would come for me. The ride was silent. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't even write it down. Something in me believed that if I left a trace, an echo of intent, he would be waiting for me the moment I arrived. Not watching from the woods, not behind the fence. Inside. Behind the door. Under the bed. Where all things crawl when the lights go out. When I stepped onto the cracked sidewalk outside the house, I felt nothing at first. No shock. No cinematic rush of memory. Just that same dull sickness that I'd carried for years, now heavier in the air. The new owners had painted the place a sour, pale yellow. The yard was neater. The fence was gone. Gone. My breath caught in my throat. That crooked chain-link boundary that had stood for as long as I'd lived there, rusted and half-swallowed by ivy, where I had first seen the black figure at dusk, it was simply not there. As if it had never been. In its place was just flat lawn, sloping into a row of tall hedges and a modest, open view of the woods beyond. And for a moment, I questioned everything. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I was sick. Maybe it had always been like this, and the fence was a fabrication of some trauma, something my brain had sewn into memory to explain him. I knocked on the door. A woman answered, early 40s, cautious but polite. I told her, calmly, that I had grown up in the house, and I was passing through, and would she mind terribly if I looked around the yard for a few minutes? To remember. She gave a careful smile and nodded. That's fine. Just the yard, okay? I nodded. I stepped onto the back porch, heart pounding, feet heavy as stone. The lawn was smaller than I remembered. The trees thinner. But the feeling, that wrong, clenching, oil-slick feeling in the air, that was still here. Worse than ever. I stood where the fence should have been. I looked out at the trees. Nothing moved. No birds. No wind. Just that strange, complete stillness. Then I turned. And I saw the crawlspace door. I had forgotten about it. Completely. A low, rotting panel behind the garage that led to the dark underbelly of the house. As kids we were forbidden from going near it. My father had nailed it shut at one point, after finding evidence of squatters, or so he'd claimed. But it was ajar now. Just slightly. As if something had pushed it from the inside. I don't know what moved me. Maybe it wasn't me at all. Maybe he wanted me to open it. I knelt, slowly, ignoring the throb in my knees. Reached out. Pulled the door open. Darkness. Cold. And then. A whisper. Not words. A breath. A shape of breath. It reached out like a hand. And there, in the back of the crawlspace, not 6 feet in, I saw him. Crouched. Still. Watching. His head cocked like always. No fence. No distance. Just him. Inches from me. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even move. I stared until my vision swam. I blinked, and he was gone. And in his place, a scrap of paper. Dirty. Folded. I reached in with trembling fingers and took it. It was a page from my journal. But not a burned one. This one was clean, whole. And written in handwriting I didn't recognize. It said only, "He was never behind the fence. You were." I stood, ran. Didn't thank the woman. Didn't look back. I drove for hours, until the sky turned black and my fuel gauge blinked red. Parked at a truck stop and sobbed like a child behind the wheel. That night, I didn't sleep. Because I finally understood something that had been buried under years of avoidance. He wasn't just a curse. He wasn't just watching me. He was part of me. Or I was part of him. The fence hadn't kept him out. It had kept me in. And whatever part of me had first seen him that day, it had never really left that yard. It had never left him. After I left the house, something in me began to rot. Not in the poetic way people say when they mean depression, or numbness, or grief. I mean rot. I mean pieces of myself were missing. Time began to break. I'd find myself staring at a wall and then notice that night had fallen. I'd wake up in different clothes than I remembered putting on. Once I found my own handwriting on the bathroom mirror. "He's inside now," but my hands were clean. No markers in the apartment. No explanation. The worst part wasn't the fear anymore. It was recognition. I wasn't discovering him. I was remembering him. And whatever pieces of me had resisted that were now being stripped away, day by day. Thought by thought. I was becoming receptive. That's the word that kept echoing through my mind, like something he'd planted there. "You're receptive now." I stopped going to work. My manager left 3 voicemails. I didn't listen. I stopped answering calls. I let food spoil on the counter. Dishes stacked, crusted in mold. The windows stayed closed. Curtains drawn. I didn't leave the apartment for 5 days. I barely moved. Because whenever I moved, I could hear it, the soft rattle of chain link. Somewhere inside. Not outside my window. Not at the edge of some imagined property. But within the walls. In the plumbing. The clatter of him brushing through the pipes. The thin hiss of breath behind the vent. I was afraid to look in mirrors. Because once, just once, I caught something standing behind me. Not fully. Just a glimpse. But it was him. Closer than ever. No longer watching from afar. Now he watched through me. He wore me like a coat. And then came the photographs. I was digging through a box of old junk from my childhood closet, half out of desperation, half out of the same compulsion that had dragged me back to the old house. I don't remember starting. Just found myself cross-legged on the floor, fingernails dirty, breathing hard, dust choking my throat. The box was full of random things, birthday cards, broken toys, cassette tapes with no labels. At the bottom, photographs. 100 or more, loose, bent, stuck together with time. I flipped through them slowly. Me at 6, grinning with cake on my chin. Me holding a dog I didn't remember. Me at a park with Mom, sitting on the swings. All normal. All safe. Until I reached one I'd never seen before. A picture of me, maybe 12, standing by the backyard fence. Alone. But not quite. In the far background, nearly out of frame, near the trees, there was something. Not quite a man. Not quite a shadow. Blurred by the camera's motion. Head tilted. I dropped it. Shuffled through the next few. Another one, birthday party. Candles. Friends. But there he was again, barely visible in the kitchen doorway. No one else looking at him. Then another. And another. Dozens. All taken at different times, different places. But always with him. Sometimes just a sliver of silhouette. Sometimes a full, clear shape. Never interacting. Never acknowledged. Just there. Watching. Waiting. Like a fungus growing quietly under wallpaper. Like a secret in the bones of the house. In me. I started ripping them up. Hands shaking, tears streaming down my cheeks, choking on the sudden hysteria. Torn bits flying through the air. But even as I destroyed them, something shifted inside me. Something broke. And I heard him. Not aloud. Not in the air. Inside my teeth. My tongue. You knew. You've always known. I screamed. I screamed for minutes, maybe longer. No one came. No one knocked. It was like I'd vanished from the world. Like I was screaming inside a sealed jar. I think I passed out. When I woke, the photos were gone. All of them. Just a single sheet of paper resting on my chest. A sketch. Charcoal, crude, unmistakable. The fence. The boy. And him, closer than ever. Beneath the drawing, in that same handwriting I'd seen in the crawlspace. He was the first thing you saw when you opened your eyes. I haven't left my apartment in 9 days. I keep hearing the chain link. It's louder now. Not behind me. Not outside. Under the floorboards. The floorboards began to shift on the 10th night. Not creak. Not groan. Shift. The kind of movement you feel in your bones more than your ears, a slow, deliberate tightening of the space beneath you. Like something was rearranging itself just out of sight. I would sit in the living room, wrapped in a blanket that no longer smelled like anything familiar, and listen. It always started the same, that soft clatter of chain link in the pipes. A low thud behind the walls. Then, slowly, like wet cloth being pulled across tile, the sound of something crawling just below the floor. And with each night, the distance between me and it became smaller. The house had windows, doors, vents, but none of it felt like an exit anymore. I walked in circles sometimes, trying to find the exact spot where the sensation of watching felt strongest. It changed. Shifted. Adapted. Like a predator moving in the tall grass, always just beyond focus. But then, something new happened. I found the door again. Not the front door. Not the bedroom. A door I didn't remember existing. Tucked behind a crooked bookshelf in the hallway. A door painted the exact color of the wall. No handle. No hinges. Just there. I stared at it for an hour the first time I saw it. Didn't touch it. Didn't breathe too loud. The next day, it was gone. I should have felt relief. I didn't. Because deep inside, I knew what it meant. He wasn't behind the door. I was. I stopped trusting my reflection around that time. It didn't always move with me. Sometimes it stared a split second too long after I'd turned away. Sometimes I caught a flicker of that tilt in the head. The posture. As if something was learning me from the inside out. Rehearsing how to wear me when it was ready. And the worst part? It was working. I began to forget things. My name. My voice. One morning I picked up my phone to call someone, anyone, but the contacts list was empty. No names. No numbers. Just a single note under favorites. You're doing so well. He's proud of you. I threw the phone at the wall. It didn't break. It just shut off, screen blank, like a dead eye rolling back into its socket. I tried to leave the apartment on the 13th day. I made it as far as the stairwell. There was a figure standing 2 floors down. Not moving. Just watching. Backlit by the red exit sign, its shadow too long, too thin. I took a step. It tilted its head. I went back inside. That night, the photographs returned. But they weren't scattered. They were arranged, taped along the hallway walls, covering every inch of space like wallpaper. Only this time, none of them were from my childhood. These were photos of me now. Me sleeping. Me sitting. Me in the bathroom, brushing my teeth. Me at the hallway door. But I had never taken them. I lived alone. I lived alone. At least I thought I did. I tore every photo down with shaking hands, tore them into confetti, flushed them. But the hallway kept the smell, like old film and mold and something deeper, sweeter. Like decay that had memorized me. The door behind the shelf returned that night. Open this time. Not wide. Just enough to show a sliver of dark. Not pitch black. But movement. Like fog on a lake at dawn. Like breath before sound. I stepped close. Inside was a room. I recognized it instantly. My childhood bedroom. Same blue walls. Same warped desk. Same half-broken closet door. But twisted slightly. Off by degrees. Like a replica drawn from memory by something that didn't quite understand what childhood was. It smelled of rot and crayons. I stepped inside. Behind me, the door vanished. And across the room, against the opposite wall, was the fence. It ran the length of the space, solid, real, impossibly embedded through drywall and floor. And standing behind it, barely visible through the chain-link weave, was him. But this time, he didn't tilt his head. This time, he smiled. It wasn't a grin. Not human. It was something that stretched across his presence like a crack through concrete. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Because I finally understood the truth. I hadn't seen him first when I was 12. I had known him long before. He wasn't following me from behind the fence. He was trying to bring me back. And each sighting, each echo, each consequence, they weren't curses. They were calls. And every time I remembered him, looked for him, feared him, I was stepping closer to home. I stood in the replica of my old bedroom for what felt like hours, though time had begun to blur and pulse in ways that made clocks meaningless. The air in that room was thick with stillness, not just of dust or decay but of something older, something that waits. The chain-link fence, now embedded directly into the room's structure, gleamed slightly under a light source I couldn't find. It didn't make sense. It wasn't a metaphor. It was there, real enough that I could see rust flaking off the wire, could hear the occasional metallic tick as if something brushed against it from the other side. He stood behind it, unmoving, head no longer tilted but upright and intent, his gaze not just fixed on me but through me, as though examining something behind my eyes, behind my thoughts. I should have run, should have screamed or struck the wall to find the seams in this impossible room, but I didn't. I just stood there, barely breathing, my heartbeat slowing into something like rhythm, like sync. The wallpaper began to peel. First at the corners, curling like skin under fire, then in long, deliberate strips, revealing not drywall or wood but more photographs, endless photographs pasted underneath, layered 3, 4, 5 deep. Each image was of me in stages of life I no longer remembered, places I never visited, events I never lived. In one I was older, gray-haired, slouched in a wooden chair staring out a window into fog. In another I was a child again, perhaps 5, standing at the edge of a pond, barefoot, staring down at a reflection that did not match me. Each photo contained a fragment of him, sometimes in full figure, sometimes only a shadow on the wall, sometimes only the distortion in a mirror's edge. He had been there always. Not just from 12. Not just from the yard. I had never been alone. I turned from the wall and the photos folded back into place, like leaves responding to wind, though no breeze stirred. Behind me the desk was now covered in drawings. Charcoal. Pencil. Blood. The same image repeated over and over, a figure behind a fence, watching a child sleep. Some were hurried, others agonizingly detailed. One had a single word scribbled in the corner, replace. My hands began to ache. I looked down and realized they were stained, fingertips blackened with charcoal dust I had no memory of touching. Beneath my nails, red. I tried to speak but my throat seized as if language was no longer part of me, as if my mouth remembered a silence older than my voice. And then he moved. It was small. Barely a twitch. But it was real. One step forward, his hand reaching up to the fence. The sound it made was soft, intimate, metal shifting under reverence, not force. His fingers curled through the links, bone white and long, too long. He leaned in, face still indistinct, like smoke trapped in flesh. I could feel him behind my eyes now, pressing inward, not breaking in but awakening. The boundary wasn't between us. The fence wasn't a wall. It was a mirror. It had always been a mirror. He spoke. Not aloud. Not in sound. It vibrated in my lungs, in the walls, in the memory of my teeth falling out in a dream I'd never had. His voice was not words but knowing. He said, "You are not the first. You are not the last. You are what I wore before the fence closed. You are the echo that forgot it was hollow." I stumbled back, struck the desk. The papers flew. The room pulsed, dimmed, cracked at the corners. I reached for the door but there was none. Only more wall, now melting, revealing not drywall but more yard, as if the room was unraveling into the place I feared most. The fence continued through the walls, across space, across memory. I could see now that it didn't separate my world from his. It was the thread binding everything together, the chain that ran through the heart of every memory, every failure, every loss. Every tragedy after his appearance wasn't punishment. It was erosion. He was pulling pieces from me each time, digesting them, refining what he needed. And now, I was mostly gone. I sank to my knees. Not out of defeat. Out of return. My hands fell into dirt. Grass pushed up through the floor. The carpet rotted away, replaced by the yard I hadn't stood in since I was 12. The swing set was there, crooked. The treehouse, collapsed. The sky above was static gray. The fence now encircled me entirely. He stood at every side. Each version of him watching. Waiting. Then one stepped forward, and it wasn't him anymore. It was me. But not now me. It was the 12-year-old version, wide-eyed, trembling, barefoot and dirty, staring at me with a mixture of horror and recognition. He Rice. The child me whispered something I couldn't hear, and then he turned and ran into the trees, vanishing like smoke. I crawled toward the hole. I couldn't stop. My hands moved on their own. My knees bled. The grass around it was dead. And from within, I heard the softest rattle of chain link. I leaned over the hole and for a long, trembling moment saw nothing, only a kind of absence so total that it felt like my eyes were being pulled inward. Not darkness. Not shadow. Less. It was the space between things. A gnawing, open absence that vibrated in my skull, as though every cell in my body was trying to remember something I'd buried, not just from memory but from the fabric of what made me human. And from within that hollow, a sound emerged. A low, wet rhythm, like breath pressed through raw meat. Not quite breathing. Not quite whispering. The sound of something waiting. The grass around the hole quivered. I looked up and saw that the yard no longer had edges. The trees in the distance folded in on themselves like paper models crushed by a hand. The sky blinked once. Not cloud cover. Not a storm. It blinked. And through that impossible eyelid I saw a reflection of myself standing at the center of a room with no walls, screaming soundlessly into a mirror shaped like a fence. I felt something inside me begin to slip. My name. My age. My sense of where the body began and ended. It all thinned. I tried to speak, to say something out loud, just to prove I still had a voice, but what came out was his voice. I came home. 3 words, wrong mouth. Not sound. Not echo. I had said nothing. But the words were out there now, thick as molasses, clinging to the air. I stumbled back, tripped over something buried beneath the yard. My hand hit wood. Fingers clutched dirt, found a corner, and when I dug it free, I uncovered a box. The same one I buried when I was 12. The one filled with broken toys and the drawing I'd made of the thing at the fence. But it wasn't my handwriting on the note this time. It wasn't the crayon scrawl of a scared child. The words were carved, deep, burned into the wood with something hot. He came through. I tore the box open. Inside was a photo of my mother, face scratched out. Another of my childhood home in flames. Another of me in a hospital bed, face turned away, bandages soaked through with something dark and smiling underneath. At the bottom was a photo of the hole itself, taken from below. The image showed my face peering down into it. Except the face wasn't mine. It was his. He was looking up from inside the hole, wearing the soft expression of someone about to be let back in. The dirt beneath my feet liquefied. Not mud. Something finer. Like powdered bone. I sank an inch. 2. I tried to crawl backward, but the ground pulled at me like fingers, gentle but firm. Not malicious. Not angry. It was welcoming. The fence now stretched around me, encircling the entire yard, the entire horizon. There was no longer an outside. The world was inside the fence now. Behind it, I saw the others. People I had forgotten. People who looked like family but smiled with too many teeth. A woman who might have been my sister. A boy who might have been me but twisted just wrong. They all stood still, mouths open, humming low and tuneless, staring at me with identical eyes. Not blank. Not cruel. Just, done. Finished. Emptied. I begged the hole not to open. I whispered nonsense. Prayers I didn't believe in. Promises I'd change. But the hole didn't care. The fence didn't care. They weren't evil. They were patient. Absolute. Purposeful. I screamed and the hole responded. The sound it made was the rattling groan of every bad night I'd ever endured, the death of my father, the breakup, the job I lost, the friend who vanished, each trauma now shaped into a syllable, syllables into a name, the name into a key. And I had turned it without meaning to. Every fear was a gesture. Every memory, an invitation. A hand rose from the center of the hole. Not reaching for me. Not threatening. Just, resting. Waiting for me to take it. I stepped back once, twice, but there was nowhere to go. Behind me, the room returned, the walls forming again, but now made of chain link, woven from the same material as the fence. Everything was the fence now. The house. My thoughts. The future. The moment I stepped forward as a boy was the moment I began stepping forward forever. And still, the hand waited. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. Because the moment I looked into the hole and let it know I remembered, the hand was mine. I didn't remember stepping forward, but I must have, because when I looked up, I was no longer above the hole, I was beneath it. The yard was inverted, hanging above like a gray sky stitched together with roots and rust, the fence now arching downward in a circle, forming not a perimeter but a dome. A cage. My cage. And I was not alone. He stood at the far end, though far no longer meant distance. The space bent around him, as though light itself refused to touch his outline. Not a shadow. Not a person. A presence in the shape of a man. His fingers still curled gently through the links, but now the fence was inside him, threading through bone and sinew, wrapping his form like wire through meat. And I could see clearly now, he had no face, because there was nothing left to show. It had all been taken, worn, dissolved. Piece by piece, over years, he had consumed what made me me, leaving only what fit. And now, he was nearly finished. He turned, not his body, but the world, and the walls rippled like wet fabric. The images from the bedroom, the charcoal drawings, the photographs. They hung suspended in the air, orbiting slowly like relics in a dead museum. I saw myself in every one, aging forward and backward, faces I barely recognized as mine flickering between versions I never became. Each photo a moment stolen, a reality tested and erased. He had been trying me on for years, seeing which version fit best. Not haunting. Not torturing. Tailoring. Preparing a vessel for the last step. I staggered forward. My legs no longer moved right. My knees bent just slightly too far, and my arms ached with the weight of someone else's posture. I tried to scream, but the sound came out normal. Wrongly normal. A stranger's voice in my throat. The kind of scream you hear from someone pretending they aren't afraid. I fell to my knees again, and the earth beneath me pulsed like a breath. Not alive, but responding. A system that had finally received its input. He spoke once more, not with words, but sensation. An idea pressed like a thumbprint into my spine, folding around my thoughts like wet cloth. You are the last gate. When you break, I will move. I don't know how long I stayed there. Hours. Days. I lost the ability to mark time. Instead, I saw only moments, a string of them playing in a loop. Me at 12, standing by the window. Me at 21, finding the note. Me at 33, staring into the empty yard as the fence rattled on a windless night. Moments I had believed were mine, now revealed as his. He was always there, just behind the blink, waiting for the eyes to close long enough to slip in. Not with malice. With design. Eventually, the ceiling above, the yard inverted, began to peel away. The grass curled like ash, the trees collapsed in on themselves, and the sky tore like damp paper. Through the rip came light. Not blinding. Not warm. Just flat, sterile. The light of nowhere. It filled the cage and washed over me, and I felt my skin begin to forget itself. I looked at my arms and saw names scrawled there, not tattoos, not scars, names. All the versions of me that had come before. Some I recognized. Others belonged to lives I'd never lived but somehow still mourned. They flickered like candlewicks and then went dark. One by one. Until only the last name remained, etched deep into the flesh of my left forearm, him. I began to laugh. Not out of madness or irony, but because I understood. The fence wasn't built to protect me. It wasn't there to hold him back. It was to contain what I would become if I ever stepped through. He was not a ghost. Not a creature. Not even a memory. He was the shape left behind when a soul empties. A perfect echo. A waiting shell. A fence with eyes. And I had stepped through. I had fit. When the light dimmed, he was gone. And I remained. I rose on legs that bent right now. I flexed fingers that no longer trembled. My breath was steady. The cage had vanished, but I still felt the weight of the links in my bones. I was back in the house. The real house. Not the memory of it. The same stains on the kitchen floor. The same creak on the third stair. Everything perfectly ordinary. But something was different. People looked at me now with polite distance. Friends who had once hugged me now stood 2 feet away. My mother, what's left of her, calls sometimes, but her voice is clipped, like she's speaking to a stranger who knows her secrets. No one mentions the fence. They say it was torn down years ago. They don't remember the humming. Don't remember the boy who disappeared, the neighbor who moved without packing. They remember nothing. But I remember everything. And at night, when I close my eyes, I feel the fence rattle, not outside. Not beneath. Within. Because I was the gate. And now I am open.